The grave had his full name carved into the stone. Daniel Hayes stood frozen beneath cold rain while his flashlight trembled violently in his hand. Mud soaked through his boots as thunder rolled across the hills surrounding Black Hollow Cemetery. For several seconds, his brain refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. The gravestone stood crooked near the far back corner of the cemetery, beneath dead trees twisted by decades of storms. Moss covered most of the surface, but the carved letters remained horribly clear beneath the flashlight beam. Daniel James Hayes. Beneath the name sat tomorrow's date. Daniel stumbled backward instantly. No, his voice cracked weakly beneath the storm. No, no, no! Rain dripped from his hair while panic crawled slowly through his chest. He looked around desperately, expecting cameras, pranksters, anything explaining this nightmare. Nothing moved among the gravestones. Black Hollow stretched silent, except for distant thunder and rain tapping against stone. Daniel stared back toward the grave again. Same name, same birth year, same exact middle initial. His knees nearly gave out beneath him. He hadn't visited Black Hollow Cemetery in 15 years, not since burying his father beneath these same hills. Tonight he only came because his truck broke down nearby during the storm while driving home through the mountains. The cemetery path had looked like a shortcut toward the highway. Now he wished he had stayed inside the truck instead. Trembling violently, Daniel stepped closer again. Fresh dirt surrounded the gravestone, recently dug. The grave itself waited open beside the marker beneath a dark tarp partially soaked with rainwater. The smell rising from the hole below smelled fresh, wet earth, rot. Daniel's stomach twisted painfully. Then his flashlight flickered. A shadow moved briefly near the trees beyond the grave. Daniel spun instantly. Hello? Silence answered. Rain continued falling softly between crooked gravestones. Then came the sound of dirt shifting behind him. Slow, careful. Daniel turned slowly back toward the open grave. Something moved beneath the tarp inside the hole. Daniel backed away immediately. Then a voice whispered softly from inside the grave itself. You're early. Daniel's pulse exploded instantly. He ran blindly through the cemetery without looking back. Branches clawed against his jacket while mud nearly threw him to the ground several times. Behind him he heard movement crossing the graves slowly, following. He didn't stop until he reached the highway breathless and shaking. His truck still sat abandoned beside the road exactly where it died earlier. Daniel threw himself inside and locked the doors immediately. Calm down, he whispered repeatedly to himself. You're exhausted. Thunder rattled the windshield while rain intensified outside. Daniel stared toward the cemetery entrance visible faintly down the road. Then his headlights flickered twice. A figure stood briefly near the cemetery gate illuminated by lightning, tall, motionless. Watching him, another flash of lightning came seconds later. The figure was gone. Daniel jammed the ignition desperately. The truck sputtered weakly before roaring back to life. He drove home far too fast through empty mountain roads while refusing to check his mirrors even once. But after reaching his apartment safely, sleep never came. Every time Daniel closed his eyes, he saw the gravestone again. Tomorrow's late. His name. Around 3:13 a.m., exhaustion finally dragged him into shallow sleep on the couch. Then came knocking at his apartment door. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel woke instantly beneath darkness. The knocking came again, slow, heavy. He checked the clock, 3:33 a.m. Who is it? Silence answered. Then came the whisper through the other side of the door. You missed the funeral. Daniel froze completely. Same voice from inside the grave. Slowly he approached the peephole while every instinct screamed at him not to look. The hallway outside stood empty beneath dim apartment lights. Nobody there. Yet the whisper returned directly outside the door. Tomorrow comes fast. Something slid slowly beneath the crack at the bottom of the door. A photograph. Daniel stared at it for several seconds before crouching carefully to pick it up. His blood turned to ice immediately. The photograph showed Black Hollow Cemetery, his grave. But now something new lay inside the open grave itself. A body. His body. Pale dead eyes staring upward toward the camera. Chapter 1, Part 2. Daniel didn't go to work the next morning. He barely moved from the couch. The photograph remained sitting face down on the kitchen counter because he couldn't force himself to look at it again. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dead version of himself lying inside that grave beneath rain-soaked darkness. Around noon, he finally called his older sister Rebecca, hoping another person could restore sanity to this nightmare. She arrived an hour later, visibly worried after hearing panic in his voice. "Okay," Rebecca said carefully while sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "Tell me everything." Daniel explained the cemetery, the grave, the whispering voice, the photograph beneath the door. Rebecca listened silently without interrupting. But as Daniel spoke, her face slowly lost color. "You believe me," he whispered finally. Rebecca hesitated. "Dad used to tell stories about Black Hollow when we were kids." Daniel frowned weakly. "What stories?" Rebecca rubbed her arms nervously. "About graves appearing before people died." Silence filled the apartment. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "That's insane, I know." Rebecca looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "But people around Black Hollow used to disappear sometimes. And afterward, families would claim their graves appeared days before." Daniel laughed shakily from pure nerves. "You're seriously saying the cemetery predicts death?" Rebecca looked toward the photograph uneasily. "I'm saying Dad was terrified of that place." Before Daniel could answer, the apartment lights flickered suddenly overhead. Both siblings looked upward instinctively. Then Daniel's phone buzzed loudly on the table. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering slowly. Static crackled through the speaker first, then breathing, wet, uneven breathing. Finally, the whisper returned. "The grave is waiting." Daniel threw the phone across the room instantly. Rebecca stood up immediately. "We're calling the police." But before either moved, another voice echoed faintly from somewhere deeper inside the apartment. A second voice, familiar. Their father's voice. "Don't let him bury you." Daniel's pulse stopped. Rebecca stared toward the dark hallway leading to the bedrooms. "Did you hear that?" Then came scratching from inside the walls. Slow fingernails dragging behind drywall throughout the apartment. Daniel backed away trembling. The scratching moved closer through the walls around them. Then something slammed once against Daniel's bedroom wall, hard enough to shake framed pictures nearby. Bam! Rebecca grabbed Daniel's arm instantly. "We're leaving now." But when Daniel looked toward the apartment door, wet cemetery dirt had begun slowly spreading beneath it from the hallway outside. Thick black mud creeping inward across the floorboards, then came knocking again. This time from inside the walls themselves. Knock, knock, knock. Their father's whisper returned weakly through the apartment darkness. "He's digging already." Chapter 1, Part 3. They drove straight to Black Hollow Police Department through heavy rain while evening darkness slowly swallowed the mountains. Sheriff Nolan clearly expected drugs or psychological breakdown after hearing Daniel's story. But his expression shifted the moment he saw the photograph. "Where did you get this?" Daniel swallowed hard. Someone pushed it under my apartment door. Nolan studied the image silently beneath flickering office lights. Then he frowned deeply. This grave. He looked back toward Daniel uneasily. It wasn't there yesterday. Daniel's stomach tightened painfully. You've seen it? Nolan hesitated before nodding slowly. Black Hollow Cemetery gets vandalized sometimes. I patrol there regularly. He looked disturbed now. There was no fresh grave last night. Silence filled the office. Then an older dispatcher near the back quietly spoke without looking up from her desk. The cemetery chooses. Everyone turned toward her instantly. Sheriff Nolan sighed heavily. Martha, you know the stories, the old woman interrupted calmly. Her cloudy eyes settled on Daniel. Once your grave appears, something starts walking toward you. Daniel's breathing quickened. What does that mean? Martha stared silently several seconds before answering softly. Death already knows your face. Sheriff Nolan clearly regretted bringing Daniel here now. He grabbed his keys immediately. Fine. We'll go look together. Rain hammered harder by the time they arrived at Black Hollow Cemetery. Evening shadows stretched long between crooked gravestones while thunder echoed overhead. Daniel felt sick the moment he saw the grave again. Still there, waiting, fresh dirt surrounding the open hole. Sheriff Nolan approached cautiously with flashlight raised. Jesus, he whispered quietly. Rebecca gripped Daniel's arm tightly beside him. Then Nolan's flashlight stopped suddenly on something near the bottom of the grave. A shovel, fresh mud covering the blade, and beside it, footprints leading upward out of the grave itself. Daniel's pulse exploded. The footprints circled slowly around the grave before disappearing into darkness between trees beyond the cemetery. Sheriff Nolan followed them cautiously while gripping his flashlight tighter. Daniel noticed something horrifying then. The grave looked deeper now than before, much deeper, as though someone had continued digging since last night. Rebecca whispered beside him, "We should leave." Then lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the bottom of the grave clearly for one brief second. Daniel stopped breathing. A coffin sat down there now, old black wood soaked with rainwater, and the lid stood partially open. Sheriff Nolan crouched slowly near the edge, aiming his flashlight downward into the coffin. Silence followed. Then Nolan's face drained completely white. He backed away instantly. Nope. Daniel's pulse hammered painfully. What did you see? Nolan didn't answer immediately, because something inside the coffin began knocking softly against the lid from within. Knock! 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 Rebecca screamed. The coffin lid shifted upward slightly. Then came breathing from inside the grave. Wet, uneven breathing. Daniel backed away trembling while the knocking grew louder. Suddenly, a pale hand slammed against the coffin lid hard enough to force it halfway open. Muddy fingers gripped the edge slowly. Sheriff Nolan raised his gun immediately. Don't move! The thing inside the coffin slowly sat upright. Daniel nearly collapsed from terror. It was him, same face, same scar beneath his jawline from childhood, same clothes. Pale, dead eyes stared upward from inside the grave while cemetery dirt poured slowly from its mouth. The dead version of Daniel smiled wider. Tomorrow comes fast, it whispered softly. Chapter 2. Part 1. Sheriff Nolan fired instantly. The gunshot exploded across Black Hollow Cemetery while the dead thing wearing Daniel's face collapsed backward into the coffin. Silence followed for one brief second. Then every grave around them began knocking from beneath the earth simultaneously. Hundreds of muffled impacts echoed through the cemetery. Dirt shifted violently around gravestones. Rebecca screamed while Daniel stumbled backward in horror. Sheriff Nolan grabbed Daniel immediately. Run! They sprinted toward the cemetery gate while thunder cracked overhead. Behind them, the earth itself erupted with movement. Pale hands burst upward through mud all around the graves. Rotting fingers clawing desperately toward open air. Daniel looked back once and instantly regretted it. Dozens of figures climbed slowly from the earth behind them. Rotting corpses wearing funeral clothes from different decades, some missing faces entirely, others dragging broken limbs through wet mud. But every single one stared directly toward Daniel while whispering together. Join us. Sheriff Nolan shoved Rebecca toward the patrol car while fumbling desperately for keys. Then Daniel saw something standing motionless near the cemetery entrance beneath rain and lightning. His father. Pale. Dead. Wearing the same black suit from his funeral 15 years earlier. "Dad," Daniel whispered weakly. His father pointed slowly back toward the open grave. "You can still stop it." Sheriff Nolan shouted desperately. "Get in the car," but Daniel couldn't move. His father stepped closer slowly. "The grave doesn't want your body," he whispered sadly. "It wants your place." Daniel frowned in confusion. Then realization hit him like ice water. The cemetery wasn't predicting deaths. It was replacing the dead. Every grave prepared someone new to join whatever existed beneath Black Hollow. The thing climbing from Daniel's coffin wasn't him. It was something preparing to become him. The dead version of Daniel suddenly appeared again beside the open grave, smiling wider now. Its skin twitched unnaturally while cemetery dirt poured endlessly from its mouth. "Come lie down," it whispered softly. Then every corpse across the cemetery began moving toward them together. Sheriff Nolan opened fire repeatedly while Rebecca dragged Daniel toward the patrol car. But the creatures kept walking anyway through rain and bullets. Daniel looked toward the burning red taillights reflecting across wet gravestones. Then he understood what his father meant. If the grave remained open, the thing would continue becoming him until eventually nobody noticed the difference. It would walk wearing his face, speak with his voice, live his life while the real Daniel joined the dead beneath Black Hollow forever. Chapter 2. Part 2. Daniel grabbed the gasoline can from Sheriff Nolan's trunk instantly and sprinted back toward the grave despite Rebecca screaming behind him. The dead version of himself lunged forward, shrieking horribly. Up close, its face looked wrong now, skin twitching beneath impossible movements while teeth shifted unnaturally inside its mouth. Daniel hurled gasoline directly into the open grave, just as pale hands burst upward from surrounding graves all around him. Rotting fingers clawed at his clothes while whispers filled the storm. "Stay with us." Sheriff Nolan fired wildly into the dead crowd while Rebecca screamed Daniel's name repeatedly. Then Daniel lit Nolan's lighter and dropped it into the grave. Flames exploded upward, violently swallowing the coffin and open pit instantly. The screaming that followed didn't sound human. Every corpse across Black Hollow froze beneath the firelight simultaneously. The dead version of Daniel collapsed backward into the burning grave, while its body twisted violently inside the flames. Then something impossible happened. The entire cemetery began sinking, slowly at first. Gravestones shifted downward into soft earth while corpses around them collapsed backward beneath mud as though unseen hands dragged them downward again. Sheriff Nolan stared in disbelief while backing toward the patrol car. Daniel's father remained standing near the cemetery entrance watching silently. "It isn't over," he whispered softly. Then he vanished completely. Thunder exploded overhead while the burning grave cracked open wider. Daniel stumbled backward in horror as black earth collapsed inward, revealing something far below the cemetery. Not dirt, a tunnel. Endless underground tunnels stretching beneath Black Hollow filled with movement deep below. Thousands of pale figures moved slowly beneath the earth like buried insects crawling endlessly through darkness. The flames illuminated countless dead faces staring upward from beneath the cemetery floor. Daniel nearly vomited. Sheriff Nolan grabbed him violently. "Move!" Suddenly, something enormous shifted beneath the ground below them. The entire cemetery trembled hard enough to crack gravestones. Then a voice echoed upward from beneath the earth itself. Deep, ancient, hungry. Another grave remains empty. Every corpse surrounding them stopped sinking. Slowly, all their heads turned toward Daniel together. Sheriff Nolan shoved Rebecca into the patrol car immediately. "Go!" But the engine refused to start. The dead figures began walking toward them again through rain and firelight while cemetery dirt bubbled beneath their feet. Then Daniel noticed something horrifying. Another fresh gravestone had appeared near the cemetery entrance beside the first one. Sheriff Nolan stepped backward toward it unknowingly. Daniel's flashlight beam illuminated the carving clearly. Sheriff Thomas Nolan. Tomorrow's date already carved beneath the name. Nolan saw it too late. The earth beneath him suddenly collapsed open. Pale hands exploded upward from the hole, dragging him screaming downward into darkness beneath the cemetery. Rebecca screamed hysterically, while Daniel grabbed desperately for Nolan's arm, but only muddy rainwater remained by the time he reached the edge. Silence followed briefly. Then Sheriff Nolan's screams echoed faintly from somewhere deep underground beneath Black Hollow Cemetery. Chapter 2. Rebecca drove blindly through storm-covered mountain roads, while Daniel sat shaking in the passenger seat covered in mud and cemetery dirt. Neither spoke for several miles. The rain eventually weakened near dawn while pale gray light slowly crept across the mountains behind them. But Daniel couldn't stop staring at the cemetery dirt, covering his hands. It moved occasionally. Tiny shifting movements beneath the mud. Rebecca finally whispered weakly, "What was that place?" Daniel stared silently through the windshield. "I don't think it's a cemetery." Rebecca looked toward him nervously. "Then what is it?" Daniel remembered the endless tunnels beneath Black Hollow, filled with crawling dead things moving beneath the earth forever. A door. Silence followed. They reached Rebecca's house shortly after sunrise. Exhaustion finally began crushing Daniel physically now that adrenaline faded. Rebecca locked every door and window immediately, while Daniel showered desperately trying to remove the smell of wet earth still clinging to his skin. But even after scrubbing himself raw, the scent remained faintly beneath everything. Around noon, Rebecca finally fell asleep on the couch from exhaustion. Daniel remained awake, staring toward the rain-covered backyard outside. Then came knocking. Knock. 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 Daniel froze instantly. The sound came from beneath the floorboards below the kitchen. Slow, deliberate knocking. His pulse quickened painfully. Then came Sheriff Nolan's voice muffled weakly from somewhere under the house. "Daniel?" Tears filled his eyes immediately. "Help me." The knocking spread slowly through the entire house beneath the walls and floors. Rebecca woke instantly, hearing it too. She whispered in terror. Then dirt began leaking slowly upward through cracks between the floorboards, wet black cemetery dirt spreading across the kitchen tiles. Daniel backed away shaking, while Nolan's voice grew louder beneath them. "It's cold down here." Rebecca grabbed Daniel desperately. "We have to leave." But Daniel already understood the horrifying truth. Burning the grave hadn't ended anything. Black Hollow had simply chosen someone else, and now it followed them home. The knocking intensified violently beneath the house. Bam, bam, bam. Then the kitchen floor cracked open slightly. Pale fingers emerged slowly through the gap, reaching upward. Sheriff Nolan's terrified voice echoed from beneath the darkness below the house. He's still digging. Suddenly, every light inside the house exploded simultaneously. Darkness swallowed everything. Then came footsteps. Wet footsteps moving slowly through the hallway behind them despite nobody being there moments earlier. Daniel turned slowly toward the darkness. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, smiling beneath shadows. Himself. Pale cemetery dirt covering his skin while dead eyes stared silently toward him. The thing wearing Daniel's face tilted its head slowly. Tomorrow, it whispered softly, finally arrived.